Hi there, my name's Jo and I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator from the UK. Back in 2014, so that's 6 years ago now, I attended my very first Stampin' Up convention. We don't actually have convention as it was then now, but we do have a similar sort of event that happens twice a year. But back in those days, we used to be able to enter a competition for a design project. So as it was my first one, I thought I'd give it a go. So I've only got a picture because unfortunately we don't get to keep our project. So this was what I designed, which was like a pyramid that sort of held together Christmas project. Little did I know that 6 years on, I'm still to this day receiving regular emails asking me how it was made, could I do instructions, etc. Now, up until this point, I haven't sort of had an opportunity really to put any instructions together. Plus also, I didn't have the original project, so I had nothing really to work from. But when the new Trimming the Town suite came out from Stampin' Up this autumn winter, I thought it was an ideal opportunity to revisit it and to also to recreate it for you. So this is what I have made. So this is, as I say, it's a recreation, so it's probably not exact to the original, but it does give you an idea of what it is. So it is a pyramid, as you can see, and then I have used the Trimming the Town suite. So I've used parts of the scene for the outside of my box, so it's sort of a bit of a daytime scene. We've got this little teepee that holds it together when it's closed, but when you open it, inside you have all the lovely houses, and you have the centerpiece here. We've got some different products to what we had back then, so I've sort of redesigned it using some different products that we now have. So as you can see, it makes a nice sort of centerpiece. It looks nice on a table, or you know, on a sideboard or something. So it's a little bit of fun. It's not a quick project. You know, obviously it does take time to put together, and I've sort of broken it down into little elements for you. So I'm hoping that you can have a go yourselves. So here's the video. So the first thing we need to do is to cut our triangles. Now I've got a piece of board here which has been taken from the metallics, brush metallics cardstock. We tend to get these boards in either the metallics or the glitter papers. Alternatively, you can buy them, and you want a reasonably thick card because we want this to be nice and strong. So first of all, I've cut the board to the size that I wanted. So this is 24 centimetres or 9.5 inches, 14.5 centimetres or 5 3/4 inches. Okay. So the first thing I've done is marked this centre line here. So this centre line is at 12 centimetres or at 4 3/4 inches. And then I've marked 2 extra points here. So this is at 6 centimetres or 2 3/8 of an inch. And this one is at 18 centimetres or 7 1/8 of an inch. So basically these points are central to our bottom measurement here. So this is number 1, that is number 2, and that is number 3. So you get the 3 pieces out quite nicely. So that's the first job, is to cut those out. Okay, so for the centerpiece, you need to cut another piece of board, and this is going to measure 12 centimetres across or 4 3/4 inches. And then this length here is 10.5 centimetres or 4 1/8 inch. And again, you're going to find that center point, which is either at 6 centimetres or 2 3/8 of an inch. So if I bring in my 3 pieces that I've now cut, these are going to sit like this once the project's done. So I'm going to cut that out now, and then I'm going to show you how I've covered them. Okay, so this paper is absolutely beautiful. We have two that I've picked out, which I absolutely love. I love this all over sort of snowflakey one, which I was going to cover the front of it, but I thought actually that could look nice as like a night scene inside. So I've left that one to one side, and I've pulled out this one, and I think this would make a really nice scene for the outside of the actual box itself. So what I've done, I'm just going to position these onto my paper here, and I'm going to cut across here at roughly 7 inches or about 18 centimeters, something like that. And then I'm going to get 2 out of that piece, and then unfortunately I will have to go over to the second piece to do my third one, but I think it will show you sort of roughly how I would work it. Okay, so I'm going to pop that to one side. I have pre-cut one, so this is my pre-cut piece, and I'm going to take one of my boards. Now when I'm positioning this, I want to try and avoid this chimney, and I also want to avoid this house here. Having said that, I could add some snow just to cover that chimney, so I'm not going to worry about it too much, but I do know that I need to position this just a little bit distance from there. So I'm going to glue my board. Ordinarily, if I was covering a box or something like that, I would probably glue the paper as opposed to the board, because it makes the paper sort of more malleable. But I'm doing it this way because I want to show you the corners without actually having any glue on at this stage. It's easier for me to explain, but when you do it, you might want to just glue the whole of your piece of paper. Now, I am acting a little bit blind here because I obviously can't see the reverse, but I do know that I was sort of in about 1 centimetre or so from that edge. And if I turn it over, I can just briefly fold, and I can see roughly where that's going to be. Now, I am catching the little bit of chimney there, but I think what we'll do is we'll add some snow along here. So I'm not going to worry about that too much. I'm going to leave it where it is. And I just want to make sure that this is all folded and glued really nicely. This is where it's probably easier to glue your paper rather than your actual board, because you will get a nice even coating of glue all over it. But this will be fine. It will settle down once it's dried. Okay, so now I've done that, what I want to do is to take my scissors and cut off any excess pieces that I have. So I'm leaving about 1.5 centimetres, something like that, 1/2 inch, just short 1/2 inch. It doesn't have to be precise, this part, so just remove any excess so that we've got a clean piece to work with. Okay. So all of these pieces are going to be hidden inside, and then we're going to be covering it. So although we want to get it as neat as possible, if it doesn't look overly neat, it's not the end of the world, because we are going to cover it with some card anyway. So the first thing I want to do is to run my bone folder down all of the 3 edges, just to start off the sort of fold really. And I'm just going to pull them all over to the back of the board and burnish them very lightly. This is why I haven't glued all over, because I wanted to explain to you sort of how this part can work. You'll be doing them all individually, so it doesn't matter if they're glued, because you're going to be sticking them down properly. So I want to make sure my corners are covered. So what I do is I push that corner over to there. I'm then going to use my, now but you can use your bone folder. And I'm just going to push that paper in to that corner. So now I know that when this folds over, this is going to be all neatly encased on this corner piece here. You are going to have a little bit of a bump here, but that's no problem because that's going to be covered. So just make sure that you've got sufficient. Okay, so again, this corner, I would push it in, bone fold my paper. Again, if it's got glue on it, it'll obviously stick and it will sit down a lot better than when it's dry. So if that's the two corners, then this will then be folded up to that point. Okay, so I think we'll start with those. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm just going to glue my corner pieces. As I say, if you prefer to do it this way, you can. But it's just easier for me to explain. So I'm going to push that corner over to the back of the board, push that corner over to the back of the board, and then I'm carefully making sure that this sits tightly into that corner. So again, just do that, make sure it fits nice and tight into the corner, and then again on the other side. It's just worth just working those corners just a little bit, because it then will lay nice and flat and you'll get a much nicer finish. Okay, so now that's done, I can see that when I glue this and fold that over, that is going to sit nice and flat. So I will glue this section here now, and we can glue that down. This isn't as straightforward as covering like a square board, because we're using quite thick board as well. Obviously it's quite an area to sort of cover, and just push the glue out so that it actually glues tightly along here. You might get some leakage from the glue. That doesn't matter, this is going to be covered. Just make sure it's all nice and flat. Okay, so the only thing when obviously you do glue and you get sometimes some excess glue, so I'm just going to remove that just from that edge. Okay, so that one's done. So now what we need to do is to do this corner here. Now this is the hardest corner, but once you've done it once, you'll be fine on all of them. So again, I'm going to fold it up to that point, and then I need to make sure it's nicely folded. But what I want to do is make sure that that is nice and square. So what I tend to do is just to push it along so it's nice and square, and then I'm going to add a little bit of glue just on that point so that that part will sit down. Again, any excess glue, it doesn't matter, just push it away. You might want to have a tissue or something to hand, which I haven't, of course. And then I'm just going to make sure that that's nicely stuck. Okay, I'm going to just put a little bit of glue under this piece here, and I want that to also stick down nice and flat. And again here, just going to squeeze a little bit of glue in there and make sure that sits nice and flat. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add glue to this long edge here. Make sure you always add glue close to the board as well, because that's where you want it to stick on the sides. It'll give you a really nice finish. Okay, so I'm going to push this over to this side, and I'm going to make sure that it all sticks really nicely and flat. Now this is where you might have to just do a little trim with your scissors, just making sure this is sitting nicely. Just check it's nice over there. Yeah, that's fine. So can you see where this just overlaps that piece a little bit? We don't want too much bulk there, so if that happens, which it will happen, you just want to trim a little bit off just so that it's nice and flat. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same again with this side. And again, I'm going to need to trim this edge. So before I stick it down, I'm just going to take my scissors and just snip off a small piece. And then make sure it all glues down nicely. Okay, always just check on the front just to make sure that it's all glued nice and flat. That's fine. And these corners, so we've got a little bit of a sort of square on the corner, so all you need to do is just to take your bone folder or something flat and just give them a tap. Because they're nice and wet with the glue, they will then sort of reshape into a nice sort of rounded corner. So I'm going to do the same here. I can feel that's not quite stuck there. That's it, that's fine. Okay, so that will be all of your pieces stuck. As I say, this chimney here, I'm actually going to put a little bit of the shimmer paste, I think, on here, just to give it a nice sort of wintry edge, and we might even add some up here, I'm not sure yet. So that's how you cover them. So you need to do all three. So I'm now going to do mine, and then I will be back to show you how to cover the actual centerpiece. Okay, so I've now covered all three of my triangles. I'm going to show you how to cover the centerpiece in a moment, but I want to add some of our embossing paste to some of the details on here where the sort of snowy parts are, and I need to make sure this chimney is covered. I'm going to do this at this point because I want it to have an opportunity to dry thoroughly before we start putting it together. I don't want to put it on too thick on this occasion because it's going to open up, so I don't want it to be too thick so that it can't sort of lay reasonably flat. It's never going to lay completely flat with paste on it. So I can't place it all over because obviously there's some elements that I want to see, so it's going to be quite sort of splattered around, and I can see here I've got part of the road which was part of here, so I'm probably going to try and lose that, although having said that, that kind of runs from there, so I might actually leave that. Obviously this road sort of is a road to nowhere really, but it sort of all works together. You don't see them actually side by side, so it's absolutely fine. So I think I will leave that little piece there, but I'm just going to take my shimmery embossing paste. Now when I made the original project, this didn't even exist, so you know, it wasn't an option that I had. So I'm just going to tap it lightly onto my areas that I want covered. As I say, I'm just tapping because I don't want it to be too thick. Normally as a paste I would put it on like your icing a cake, but I just want this just to be a sort of a token, so it looks snowy really. So I'm going to do all these areas in here. These little palette knives are also available, so it makes it nice and easy, or you could use something else you could find with a sort of flat surface. This comes in a set of 3, but I particularly like this one because it's got that point on it, so it just enables me to be able to sort of get into little areas really. I'm purposely not putting too much on it at once because, as I say, I need to get into like little areas, but I can kind of push it into areas, and I'm not too worried. I'm not worried if it doesn't go right up to the edges. Obviously, I don't want to cover my car, So it's just a case of just adding sort of little pieces really. So because I'm getting more detail up here now, I'm actually not going to put on like a layer all over. I am literally going to just add some texture. Otherwise I find you're going to lose some of your detail. So I'm just literally just randomly in sort of places. If you find you get it somewhere you don't quite want it, you can quickly push it out of the way at this stage before it dries. Okay, so I'm quite happy that that just gives that a nice texture. I am also going to add some onto my snowy mountains. Okay, so that's number one. I'm going to work on the other two now, and then I'll be back on that centerpiece and also how it all goes together. Okay, so I've now covered my three pieces. They've got all their embossing paste on. This is now dried nicely, so that is quite important just to allow that to dry. We are going to now cover our base. We are in the middle of a thunderstorm here, so if you suddenly hear a very loud clap of thunder and me jump out of my skin, you know what it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this for my base, and I'm also going to use this for my insides as well. You could cover your base if you wanted to with cardstock, which would obviously give it a really nice sort of base, but because our board is actually quite thick, I fear that we wouldn't get the sort of movement on it that we wanted to. And if I look back to my original project, I think I probably had the same thoughts on it at that time as well. So I think we're going to stick with that. So you need to cut yourself a piece of DSP for your base. Now this is going to be underneath, so if you're very precious about a piece of DSP, then I would suggest that you perhaps use something else for underneath, and then we can use sort of part of this on the actual top bit inside. I'm going to use this throughout, but it's entirely up to you. So you need to cut a piece that measures roughly 13 centimetres by 14 centimetres, or about 5 1/8 of an inch and 5 1/2 inches. This is roughly, it doesn't have to be exact because we're going to be covering it like we did before. All you want to make sure is that you've got sufficient on, if I cut it here, to actually fold in, and then again when I cut that part. So I might just leave that in place. I can see roughly where I am, and I'm not going to cut the whole way across because I'm going to need some of this for my inside, so I don't want to cut a piece where I don't need to. So again, you know, it is rough, this part, because you are going to be just using it as covering. So you can see, because this has got an overall pattern, I can afford to just remove a piece and then leave that bit whole. So hopefully, in theory, I should be able to get all my three elements from that. Whereas if I'd cut it across, I might not have been able to, although I suspect I might, but we'll find out later. So this is my piece. So I'm going to add my glue to my board exactly as I did before. Make sure I've got plenty of glue on it so it's nice firm adhesion to it. I'm going to pop this on here. Now this time we have got three corners which are like our top corners, so if you remember rightly, we had to fold it through and we might need to trim some edges as we go. So we'll just cut this like we did before. Okay, so we're going to run our bone folders round exactly as we did before. Okay, so I'm going to start down the bottom again. Okay, so I think that's all good. Right, okay, so if I bring in my pieces now, these are obviously the edges. So what's going to happen is these are actually going to sit like this. Now, this is where I said to you it won't lay completely flat because we've got paste on these. So it might be that I actually put an extra little section underneath. I'll see how it joins together because we want to make sure that these are sort of connected, if you like. So it might just be that it needs a little bit of DSP, or it might actually be okay. So we'll just see. If we need to, then we can raise the bottom just slightly. So now we need to join these pieces together. So I'm going to take one at a time, and I need to cut myself some hinges. So I am using coordinating cardstock, and this is a really good time when you can use up some of your scrap pieces of card to make some small hinges. So if you recall, this was 12 centimeters long, which was 4 3/4 inches, and I just want to make them a little bit shorter than the 12 centimeters. So I am going to probably make this, I might even, I think, go to 11.5 centimeters by 4 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so I'm going to cut mine at 11.5 centimeters. It's not quite wide enough typically. So 11.5 centimetres. And then I want to cut them roughly, I would say probably about 4 centimetres or 1.5 inches. So I cut. But what I want to do is score them in the middle. So I'm going to score at 2 centimetres, and then I'm going to score at, I'm going to cut at 4 centimetres, and then I want to score again at 2 centimetres. If you're using inches, you're just doing half of your measurements. So if you did your strips at 1.5 inches, then you're going to be cutting it at 6/8 of an inch. So you know, it doesn't actually matter on size, just as long as they're obviously scored in the center. Okay, so I'm going to do again, I'm not going to get another one out of there, that's just a little bit too short. As I say, it's a great way to sort of use your scraps really. So I can get another one out of this one. So I'm going to score at 2 centimetres, and then I'm going to cut again at 4. Okay, so you need 3 of those strips. So these are going to create our hinges, which are going to attach to here, and then also attach to the inside of our board. Okay, now I can feel this is a little bit sticky from obviously when we actually stuck all our paper down. So just, if they are, just give them a little rub off or whatever, just to remove any excess. So I'm going to fold these strips in half. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to cut the corners off here. So if this is my fold, I want to cut across that way. And I'm just doing this by eye, but I try and sort of imagine like a square at that corner. And then I'm just going to trim so I end up with that shape at the end. Okay, now this is going to stick along this edge. Okay, so what I want to make sure is that when I cut the next one, these line up nicely. So in fact, I need to cut that at a slightly larger angle. So that when that sits in there, the next one, I don't want to overlap it. So you can either do them individually or you can use one as a guide. The best thing to do is just to trim as you go, I think. So in fact, it's about a sort of 1.5 squares you're looking at rather than a square. Okay, so I'm going to stick one of these on first. So I'm just gluing half of it. And my fold is going to be on the edge of my card. So it's my outside edge, and I want to butt this up as close as I can to that edge. It has a sort of little curve on it where we've covered it. So you don't want to go over that curve, but you just want it to be sort of as close to that edge as you can get it, really. Okay, so I'm going to stick the next one, but what I want to do is just double check this angle. So as I say, I don't want these two pieces overlapping here. So you can see, in fact, I need to cut it at more of a sharper angle to ensure that when that is stuck on, that it's not going to overlap. Again, I need to cut just a tiny bit more. The reason we don't want it to overlap is just because it's going to, it will have decoration on it, but you don't want it to lumpy bumpy underneath, okay? So just make sure that they don't, and then we'll trim the other one to fit in that gap. So that is our 3 sides done here. And now we need to attach our actual outsides. So I need to decide what order I'm going to put these in. So if you imagine this is your base and this is your scene that will be opening. So you want to make sure, so for example, that sort of kind of follows on from there a little bit. So I think I'm going to move that one round to there. And then this one here. So I know that's roughly where I want them to be. Okay, so I'm just going to turn it over with 2 of them sort of in place. Because if you remember rightly, I did number them, although I have covered some of the numbers. So I'm going to put this one at number 1. I'm going to put this one at number 2. So I know then that I can mark these 2, 1, 2, 3, and I know then they're going to be in the right sections. So what we need to do is attach these to this section here. I move 2 of them out of the way. So these measurements of the 2 pieces are the same. So these are 12 centimetres. And I want you to lay this as flat as you can and then glue that piece to it. Now, this is where I say we might have to raise this very slightly, possibly because of the paste we've got on there. But it doesn't feel too bad, so we'll see. So I'm going to add glue to my tab. And then holding that in place, just make sure, as I say, that they're lined up, and then glue this down. So it's really important that this is flat, because if you held it upwards, then it would never ever lay flat again. So you just want to just make sure that it's all completely flat. And then, as you can see, that will be the side of our pyramid. So this is number 3, so I'm going to grab number 3 and do exactly the same. Make sure it's all lined up. Okay, and then just fold that over and make sure it glues nicely in place. Okay, so that's the 3 sections now all joined together. So if you can imagine, these will close up and this will be your pyramid. So we've got the little car on one side, we've got a little house on the other, and a little bit of the road, and then we've got part of the pond and skating going on that one. So they all sort of follow around in a really nice sort of picture. I love it. Okay, so now we need to think about covering our insides and creating the decoration that's going to go in the centre of it. Now, when I did this on the original one, if I can pull the picture in again, as you can see, I created a tree with a little star on top, and then I put sort of little houses all around the outside. Now, I think I'm going to repeat the houses because I think they're quite cute. The centre part of this original one was actually cotton wool, because, as I say, we didn't have the embossing paste at that time, but this time I intend to make this all with embossing paste. And then I'm not sure how I'm going to do the tree at the moment. I'm not sure how I did the original one, if I'm honest. I think I may have drawn it, so I think we might end up doing that again. And then I can produce a template, but we'll see. I'm going to have a look at some stamps, see if there's anything we could use as an alternative. So we're going to now cover our inside pieces here. So if you recall, the sizes of these, the bottom section was 12 centimetres or 4 3/4 inches. So what I want to do is I need to cut them very slightly shorter, And again, when I did the original one, I actually did a card mount on it as well. I think I'm not going to do the card mount this time because I think this paper would look much nicer if it's just kind of flattened to it. So I need to cut this. Now this is going to be quite an accurate cut, so you're going to need to perhaps juggle yours around according to how your covering has gone, etc. So just bear that in mind, but I'm looking at about 11.7 centimeters. Okay, so if I say 11.7 centimeters, and then if you recall, this measurement was 14.5. Now I'm going from this score line, so it's actually a little bit less because there's card underneath it. So I think I need to go to about 14.1. Yeah, 14.1 by about 11.8. Okay, so 14.1 by 11.8. So if I give that to you in inches in a second once we've cut it, and then we can go from there. So I'm going to take my paper again, and I'm going to cut a strip that's 14.1. And then I want to cut at 11.8. Now I'm going to cut one to start with because I want to check that this is going to be the correct size. So from an inches point of view, you will need to cut yours at about 5.5 inches by 4 6/8 of an inch. Okay, so if I bring this in, I can see that that is about correct, as is that. So I think those measurements will be okay, but as I say, you may have to adjust your own depending on how you've how thick you've covered them, how much glue you've used and things like that. So you just need to just double check these measurements for yourself. But ultimately what I want to do then is to mark my halfway point along that shortest edge. So for the inches, you're at 4 6/8 of an inch, so you need to go to 2 5/16 of an inch. So for the centimeters, we were at 11.8, so now we need to mark our center point at 5.9. okay, and then I am going to use my knife, and I'm actually going to cut off these edges. Okay, so that should give us our triangle, and this is going to stick inside here just with a tiny little border. Now when we glue this, we need to absolutely make sure that all of our little points are stuck down really, really well. So for that, I would recommend using a glue pot and a brush or a roller or something like that, whatever you use really. But they do need to be glued inside, and they need to be nice and solid. Okay, so I'm going to do that now. Then I will come back and we'll talk about the decoration and covering the centre part. Okay, so our next step is we need to cover our centre, and we also need to decorate our edges. So whilst I've been off camera, I have just cut these houses and trees out. This is from one of the pieces of the DSP, right way around. So it's the one with the lovely blue stripes on the back. So these houses have all been cut from there, as have the trees. Alternatively, if you wanted to, you could use some of the elements. These actually cut out those houses, which is lovely. But if you prefer, you could always do your own, and you could sort of cut them out and do what you wanted to do with those, colour them, etc. I wanted to make this as simple as possible today, just for demonstration purposes, really. So I've arranged some bits and pieces where I'd like them to go. I'm not particularly worried which ones go where. I just want to keep the little groupings together because I'm going to do those after I've done the centre. So I've cut myself a piece of cardstock this time, and this is just the Misty Moonlight that's obviously in the papers, etc. I just want to cover this base here. So I want to cut this, I've cut it 11.8 by 10.4, so that's about 4 6/8 by about 4 1/16. But again, you need to just test yours. Test it's exactly the same. You might need to fiddle around with your measurements a little bit, but it should on the whole be pretty much the same, really. So now I need to find my centre of my longest edge. So mine is 11.8, so that centre is 5.9. 2 3/8 if you're using inches. So I'm doing 5.9. So this is actually the same measurement that we had for the base here. If you recall, we found that centre point, that was 5.9 as well. So I'm just going to pop this in my little guillotine, and I'm just going to trim that by lining that up on the diagonal, and I'm going to do the same again. Okay, so that should give us our triangle, which is going to pop in the middle here. Let's say if you need to adjust it, you can. But again, this is going to be covered, so don't worry too much if you feel that it's not quite right. So I'm going to stick this in place. And this is what's going to have our snow scene on it when we're done. So what I intend to do, I think because the paste is obviously quite wet, I think I might even do the paste on a little separate piece that we'll sort of mount on there ourselves. So we'll do that in a little while. So now what I want to do is I want to arrange all my houses, my trees, exactly how I want them to be. So conveniently, the trees and the roofs of the houses have got that natural slant on them, so you can sort of fiddle things around a little bit, and they'll fit quite nicely. So I'm just going to rearrange them. I can't remember how they were on here. Did I have a big tree there possibly? I can't recall now. But there we go, you get the general idea. So what I want to do is I'm going to mount these. Now, because these come into the centre and they don't actually meet sort of where they join, there's still like lots of gap, we can afford to actually put these onto dimensionals if we want to. So that's what I'm going to do, because I think it will give it a nice sort of 3D effect inside. So I'm carefully just going to remove these again and add some dimensionals to the reverse. I am just going to add a third one down there. I'll explain why in a moment, because I'm going to try and add some paste to the bottoms of this to sort of bring it all in together. So I just want to line that up. See, and what I want to do is to raise that slightly from the bottom. So can you see it's just slightly up, because we're going to add some paste here to bring it sort of all together. Okay, so that's all of my houses now stuck into place. So what I want to do is to add some paste to the bottom of the actual houses, etc. It's just going to pull it all together, and it's just going to make it look sort of like it belongs, rather than sort of a floating houses really. So I'm going to take my paste again, and I'm going to take my palette knife. So I'm using the same palette knife here and just picking up some of the paste. You can see this does go hard around the edges sometimes. You just need to be careful not to try and pick up lumps if you can help it. It's quite difficult sometimes not to. So I think I'm going to work at this angle here. Now I want my snow to go at the bottom of my houses, and then I want to build it up in this section here. So I'm going to try and do my houses first, I think, just to imagine how snow, if the wind had been blowing, it would drift up and go to the bottom of the houses here, and the bottom of the tree. So as you can see, I've done the bottom of all of that one. So that's now going to pull that all in together when we've got this snowy scene going on in the centre sort of piece here. So I'm going to continue for the other two, and then I'll be back again. Okay, so next I'm going to make the tree, which we're going to sit into the centre of our piece. So as you can see, I finished off all my embossing paste along the bottoms, and we're going to create this tree which is going to sit in the middle here. So what I decided to use was this green paper, which is part of the same suite, and I remembered that we had this lovely pine Christmas tree sort of punch. Now what I didn't realise at first was that it's not actually a mirror image either side. So I cut some strips which were 5 centimeters wide, so that's about 2 inches if you're working in inches, and I scored it along its length in the middle. Okay, so if I quickly show you what I mean. So I scored this at 2.5, or as I say, 1 inch. And then I cut it at 5 centimeters or 2 inches here. So I have this strip which I'm just going to fold in half. It doesn't matter if it's not exactly in half, because some of it's waste in any event. Okay, so what I did was because I've got that score line, I can now line up my tree. Oops, still got a piece in there from before. Okay, so I can line up my tree so that that score line is in the middle of my trunk, but is also in the middle of the point at the top of the tree. Okay, and I punched 5 of those out. I now have 6 obviously, so I punched 5. But then because it's not a mirror image, it's important that the other 5 are punched from the opposite direction. So you want to make sure that the fold is exactly the same, line it up in the centre of the trunk and the centre of the top of the tree, and punch. So you'll see this is the original. Now if I try to line this up with this one, it doesn't match. It's completely out. Okay, but because I've punched this one in the opposite direction, if I fold it back on itself, that will match that edge, and likewise the next one will. So you're doing them alternate effectively. So I'm going to put that to one side because they're my spares. So I've got my 2 piles, so I need to work with them all alternately. So I'm not sure how many of these I'm going to need. I did 10 initially, so we'll see how it goes as we go along. Okay, so this is one of my ones that I punched in the other direction, and I want to line this up with this one so that they're nice and stuck together. Okay, so now I want to go back to this one. It might be worth just sort of making a note of which side is your wrong side here, and also as we get closer together, they're going to sort of be more difficult to actually make a note of. So I'm actually going to put a little mark just on this one here, so I know that that was my starting point. Okay, so I've got 2 in there so far, so I'm going to add another one. You will find that they will start to sort of move apart here. That's because obviously we're lining them up. That doesn't matter, it just means there'll be a hollow in the centre, but what it does mean is that we will be able to glue the base down quite well. You're not going to see that hole in the centre. Okay, so that's that one. So that's 3. I'm going to go back to one of these. Okay, so that's all 10. I think that will be sufficient. I don't think we need to do any more. So now what I'm going to do is just to glue those together. So these are going back to back. It's like those old Christmas decorations you used to have years ago. Okay, so that's going to be a little tree. You'll see this is the little hollow I was talking about, but that's fine because we'll use that probably to actually stick our star or whatever we're going to put on top. But what I want to do is I'm going to quickly grab my ink pad and I'm going to just sponge these edges where you can see 1 or 2 aren't quite exact. It's just the nature of it, they just move around a little bit. So I'm going to grab my ink pad. Okay, so I've got my Old Olive ink pad and I've just grabbed a little bit of sponge. I'm just going to hold this by the bottom and I'm just going to add some Old Olive to each of the sort of branches. I think it will just finish it off nicely. This is what I mean when it sometimes comes apart a little bit at the top, but don't worry about it now. We'll adjust it as we sort of stick our whatever we're going to stick on top. Just takes that little edge away. Okay, so that's our little tree done. Now we're going to have a look at how we're going to assemble it into the centre of our actual finished piece. So this will sit here and we're going to have something on top of the tree, so a little star or something. You could even make a little sort of forest of 3 or 4 if you wanted to. It's entirely up to you. This is just for details really. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to create like a little step inside here, just so one, it will raise my tree up very slightly, but secondly it will mean that my paste is not going directly onto this board here, which is what I'm most concerned about because it's quite wet. It might make it buckle and I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to make a little inside sort of shape that matches this in a triangle. So I'm thinking about 10 centimeters. Okay, so I'm actually going to do this from board again. Okay, so it was 10 centimeters. So if I just mark that with my ruler, So that's there. So that's about 4 inches if you're working in inches. Approximately 2.5 centimeters is an inch. So that's rough measurement. So my 10 centimeters was sort of here. And then I want this to come up here. So I think about 10 by 9. So I'm going to cut that first. So 9 centimeters works out to be about 3.5 inches, just a little bit above. But again, you can have a fiddle around with your own measurements. Okay, so I'm going to mark this now at its halfway point again. So this is 5 centimeters or 2 inches. And then I'm going to cut the diagonal lines from that point to the corner. Okay, so that just gives us our smaller triangle, which I am going to sit in here. I'm not going to cover this because what's going to happen is we're going to put paste all over the top of this. So again, if it's not quite right angles, don't worry too much. Sometimes actually if you move it around you'll find it will fit better than others. So but don't worry, because as I say, it's going to be covered in paste, and paste will be all around the edges as well, so we're not going to see any of that. So really don't worry too much. So what I need to do now is to glue this in place. And just make sure that is stuck down nicely. Okay, so this is our tree, which is going to sit on here. But what I want to do, I'm going to use some hot glue to actually stick this in eventually, but I want to cover this section now in the paste. So we're going to take our shimmer paste again, and we're going to take our palette knife, and we're just going to cover this. Now I want you to be quite thick with it on this point, but we do need to leave a center point where we are going to glue our tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a very thin layer so that I can go up to it, but this is going to be quite thick paste all around the outside, and then if we need to put some more in that center point when we're done, we will do. Okay, if you can still see sort of little edges on your board, you can sort of just push it down a little bit just to cover those, but you've got to remember that people are looking at the top profile, they're not actually looking at that side bit, so it's not going to be noticeable in any event. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry, and then we will come back and we will glue our tree in place, and we will also look to do the star on the top, and also the little piece that sits on top just to hold it in place when it's closed. Okay, so we have a full storm on here at the moment, so it's all gone a bit dark, so I'm hoping you can still see and it's not casting too many shadows, but I wanted to come back just to show you how we're going to put the last pieces together. So I've got my tree, and I've also got, this is actually a toothpick, but you could use a cocktail stick or something like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop it up the bottom of my tree, and as you can see, it just sits nicely out the top here. Now I've taken 5 stars, and these have been cut from the coordinating dies that's got a little house with a little star in it. So you could use a little star punch if you have one, or anything you've got really. And I've actually cut 5 of them, and we're going to glue them back to back like we did with the actual tree itself. Now I've gone for 5 rather than 10, say for example like we did on the tree, for 2 reasons. One, because they're very fiddly, so by the time we got to the end we'd have trouble, I think, sort of sticking them together. I'm not even sure we're going to do 5 really, if I'm honest, so we'll just wait and see. So as you can see, I've just folded the stars in half on a point, make sure they glue nicely together. Okay, I think I'm going to go for 4 because I think 5 is going to be too fiddly. So this time I'm going to glue both sides here, and then I'm going to pop that one into there. So we've got 4 edges of our star. Now when it's on top, you're not going to know whether you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5, so it's not going to matter. Okay, now what I want to do before this dries, I want to be able to stick my stick just up the middle, because there should be sufficient glue in there just to hold that in place. So I've got my tree, and I've got my star on top of my tree. Now I need to add that to my base piece. So you remember the hole that we left in the middle? This is going to sit in here. So we may just have to fill a little bit of the hole in there with a little bit more paste, but I think in the main it's going to be okay. So I'm going to add a tiny bit more. I'm just in fact going to pick it up on the end of like an embossing tool or something, just to fill that hole a bit more. The other thing, of course, as well, is this, once it dries, this will hold this in place as well. So there we go. It's easier to do it now. So now that's done, I've got my hot glue gun here, which hopefully is ready to go. Oh, which it is. So I'm just going to put some glue into that hole. Okay. Now what I want to do is very carefully push my tree into that hole. Now hot glue does go off reasonably quickly, but we want to be able to manipulate this just a little bit, just to get it in the right place. Now I'm sorry if my head comes into shot here. I'm just going over the top of it because it's easier to see from the top whether I'm in the center or not. I think that's as near as it's going to get. So that's now done. Our tree's inside. All our sides are done, inside and out. I got a bit of wet glue on, the hot glue on that as I went. But there we go, that's all done. Okay, so now that's all there. My paste still isn't dry quite in the centre, so I'm being just a little bit delicate with it. But if I was you, I would try and just allow that to dry fully. I'm going to put that to one side. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is to try and make the little piece that holds the top together. Now that wasn't in my original picture, but it was like a little triangle that sort of stuck, so it held it together when it was shut. It's not to hold it together completely, it's quite a, you know, it's a very loose fit. It's just to literally hold those top pieces together. So to do that, I've cut 3 squares. Now these are 4.5 centimeters square. If you're using inches, again, it's about 1 3/4 of an inch, something about that. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit bigger or smaller. And then all I've done is I've scored them on the diagonal, just in one direction. So if I just quickly score and burnish all those. And then we're effectively going to make a very small teepee card. So if you've ever made a teepee card, you'll be familiar with this technique. So we've got 3 squares, and our squares need to stick together so that we create like a teepee. So in fact, 2 of these I need to fold out in the opposite direction. Okay, so what we're going to do is where this diagonal fold is, I need to glue that to that side. Okay, so I'm just going to add glue to this top section. So you don't want any glue at the bottom, You just need to be able to line that up across the middle like so. So you're going to go up to that score line. Okay, I'm then going to repeat it for the other side. So I need to add some glue to this section here. Just make sure I get my folds in the right place. So again, the fold always has to be on that edge, and I haven't. There we go. That fold always has to be along the outside edge. Strange when you're using double-sided paper, because normally we would do this in cardstock. There we go. So just making sure, oops, just making sure that your pattern is obviously all on the outside edge. Okay, so now that we've done that, that goes over like that, and then this one is going to overlap the one below. So effectively you create like a little teepee. So I'm going to glue this again. I don't want to glue all over because it's going to be on part section, so it might actually be better just to glue this side here. Up as tight as I can so that we get a nice point on the edge. Okay, so that creates our little teepee, and then what I've done is I've made a little banner which I'm going to stick onto here. So the front of it will actually show this as a little banner, and I've taken that from the Itty Bitty Christmas stamp set. So you can see, but you could add it if you wanted to. So if I bring my piece back in, I'm now going to close this up. As I said, mine's not quite dry completely, so I'm feeling a little bit tentative with it. So this will close up, and our little TP10 will sit on top like that. So you could have it sort of sitting on a unit or whatever, looking like that, or you could have it completely open. But it's just a nice sort of little way to have it held. And then what I'm going to do is the edge where I glued, that's where I'm going to stick my little banner, because it will cover the majority of where the join was. So again, I'm just going to add a bit of glue just to that centre piece. So that's a little teepee top. If you want to do that, so it's really just to hold it closed. That removes, and then our piece will open, and there's your finished article. So I hope that all made sense. I hope you've enjoyed making the project today. It's not a quick project by any stretch of the imagination. It's quite a long-winded project, but it is surprisingly simple. As I say, I've had to recreate this from scratch because I had no measurements or anything, so I have no idea whether this was the same size as the original. I really can't remember. But I would say it was pretty close. It wasn't huge, but again, if you followed the same process, you could make it any size you wanted to. So that's it. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.